Marian really beat the odds at 93. And she did a tremendous amount in her life. As you know, if you look around, Marian was an author. She was a public relations person. She was a lover of libraries, which makes this setting just perfect for her. She helped establish South Central as a library system and helped promote it. She was a lifelong reader. Even in her 90s, she was reading. One of the last books she read was Eats, Shoots, and Leaves, which is a book about punctuation, in her 90s, so she was really into it. Marian had a great sense of humor. She loved her grandchildren. She was a little surly at times, but that was just her way. We would come and visit her, and frequently she would turn down our invitations for dinner because she was too busy. But I think it was because Marian did not want to feel dependent. She was the type of person who was very independent, fiercely independent, and how we ever got her to move to assisted living, I don't know, but eventually she did move, and it was a nice place, and I do think she liked it, but she didn't love it. At one time, I complimented her on her place. I said, "Marian, this is a beautiful little place." And she said, "Well, I wouldn't recommend it." It wasn't home. That, what Marian liked was her home, and nothing was going to, compare to her home. She had a bunch of books that she's written through the years. Even had a governor who wrote the forewords. I want just to read a paragraph from Governor Anthony Earl. Marian Edsall's book is going to be my companion for some time to come. Experienced travelers know that it's one thing to tour and a better thing to get to know the inhabitants. Roadside plants and flowers gives us the chance to be more than tourists in our environment. It gives us the chance to peek into the lives of the plant communities and discover the local flowers. Anthony Earl, Governor of Wisconsin, Madison, June 1983. Well, Marian certainly took her own advice. She traveled all over the country, all over the world. In fact, she would never be here at this time of year. Typically, she'd be in Alabama. She got out of Dodge in December and January. How many years did she spend in Alabama?
Oh, at least 20.
20 years. So they would take their camper, and they loved to camp. They loved to hike. All her vacations with Jim were canoes and kayaking. They loved life. They enjoyed it in many ways. You'll see some of her artwork here. She worked with watercolor. She worked with stained glass. Very talented woman. So we just wanted to remember her today, and if you have any stories to share about Marian's life, we'd certainly like to hear them. I know there are neighbors and friends and former co-workers here today. If you'd like to share something, please.
They developed our neighborhood. Jim and Marian found the land and got some partners, and the Hemp Corporation, Tom and Kevin,
Marian Edsall,
a lawyer and a wielder. They set up a table down on Cleveland Road, and people driving by could pick a lot and buy it. Well, we first met John Whiskey. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for John. He bought a lot before we did. He bought a lot. We bought a lot. Brinks bought a lot. And so that's how we got to know him. And then, as a teacher at university and working in the art department, working on projects trying to get building done, I worked with Jim in his capacity as director of planning and construction for years. Then Marian found out I could do design work, which was teaching design, and so she pressed me into service to help her with materials for the South Central Library System. So she was a wonderful client and colleague, and we had a lot of fun doing posters, and we did the original logo for the South Central system. Back in those days, the libraries were struggling with the idea of moving from books to media. So I had these newfangled devices. Included, there was a book, an open book, and a movie reel, and a record. That didn't last very long, and as technology developed, that's been replaced by digital media. But she was great to work with. We had a lot of fun working on projects, and we really miss Jim and Marian a lot out in Deer Run. here's to Marian and Jim, our dear neighbors who have this out.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Yes.
Well, my name is John Bushby. I live next door to Jim and Marian. And I was a designer and did a lot of houses all through Madison and around the countryside. And I remember I met with a couple in Verona, and they wanted to build on this country lot, so we went out and looked at it. And I realized right away, wow, I've got to buy a piece of land out there. So I bought the property next to Jim and Marian in '67 when our first daughter was born. Jim was a architect at the university and was involved in planning and did a lot of work at the university that would take too long to discuss. And so we had many hours talking with Jim about the university and the architecture in Illinois, where he came from originally. And I believe Marian came from Florida, or lived in Florida, right?
Well, Chicago, but she spent a lot of time in Florida as well as Michigan.
Yeah, and of course my wife was involved in gardening from her parents and grandparents, and so was Marian. So they clicked together well, and we spent many hours talking about the native flora and fauna on our hill. There was something about Marian being feisty. Well, Marian's mother lived at the house with her for a while, and I remember Jim said, "Oh, when I get up in the morning, if I don't say good morning, Mom, to Marian's mother, the first thing, she wouldn't talk to him for the whole day." So, but they were just wonderful neighbors, and as a young family, we had a lot that we learned from them about taking care of the land and looking for things and keeping things not necessarily neat and tidy, but preserving those things that were important and getting rid of the weeds and so forth. And our whole hill was pretty wild. It still is, but like everything has changed. You've got outside of basic species coming in. But we had wild raspberries growing along the road and all kinds of wildflowers and things that were there. And then at some point, Marian decided she was going to do a book on wildflowers. And she and Jim would travel all over the state with their camera and take pictures on the side of the road. Occasionally they'd come over to our yard and take pictures of some of the stuff that we had too. And so she developed this great book that you were discussing. And we've always enjoyed that and still keep it. And I think Marian had so many interests in different groups that she talked with, and we didn't get involved with the library people. We knew a little about them. And I don't think the library people knew about our neighborhood that much, although they were out there visiting once a year. I think she had a party. But she was just a very interesting lady. She had just all kinds of talents and interests and worked all over the place. And I'm sure she had this group in Alabama that she frequented with. And then also, I think, up in Thunder Bay, wasn't it, that they were in Canada. So Jim was from the land of Lincoln, I guess you could say. So he had that mystique and that interest, and it was just a nice beginning for us to move out to this country setting and be involved with them. We enjoyed them very much.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. You obviously knew these two very well. Anyone else want to share a memory?
Well, I can share just a couple of things. We were talking a little bit about the house, and I loved their house. It had just windows going all the way up to the second floor. And so my mom and I would stay there on Christmas Eve. And on Christmas Day, the Christmas carols would start playing. But you couldn't come down until Joy to the World. And we'd come racing down. And I remember one particular Christmas, Grandma had made, it was bigger than I was, a teddy bear for me with a gingerbread house. And it was just out. Which was breaking tradition because you did stocking stuffers and then you had to eat her fruitcake thing before you could open presents. So we had a lot of tradition around Christmas And it just, Grandma always had another project for me, something else to learn, embroidery or, just little crafts kinds of things, and tons of books, always shoving the classics at me and, Jack London and a lot of those great books. So just, wonderful that way, but definitely feisty. So when she ended up having to go into assisted living, we would go and take her to lunch pretty much every weekend, and I'd bring her, some of her favorite chocolates and flowers and that kind of thing. And she was having some health problems about a year ago, and I was talking to my daughter Serena about it, and I said, I'm not sure, what's going to happen with Grandma. And she said, but Mom, who would we go to lunch with? And I knew then that time was, even though she wasn't like the woman that I remember, that she had connected with her great-granddaughters, which is such, a beautiful thing. And she was always very kind to them. And so it was, I'm really glad we spent that time and, had those moments together. So.
And that's the restaurant we'll be meeting at. Any of you are welcome to join us at 12:30. It's this Chinese restaurant they went to every single week for the last 2 years. She liked that place, so they just kept going back. What's the name of this restaurant?
The China Walk Buffet. So it's right by Willie Street, on University Avenue, Gammon Road. But, we're going to go because we have to. It's tradition. The food's fine. It's not great. Well, and somebody said to me, "You take your grandma to a Chinese food?" I'm like, yeah, that's mild for her. She was really into all kinds of different ethnic food, and with all the traveling they did, to Indonesia and Jakarta and Singapore and that kind of thing. So.
Talk about, wasn't she the first white woman to canoe in some region of the world? What was that?
So she went up to Thunder Bay, and they bought some land on Eva Lake. And there's a couple of pictures of Eva Lake, and they loved that cabin. But before they actually bought the property, they did a lot of, pretty rough camping, where they had the portage and all of that kind of thing. And they think that there are some areas of Canada that she was probably the first white woman to, be in some of that land, because they were way, way out there. And my grandma, would always tell the story of my mom. They were portaging, and my mom was carrying the fishing poles. And, of course, what's going to happen, right? One of the hooks, and they had to go all the way back, after they had made the portage, Like, oh. So there's lots of family lore about what happens in Canada and in Eva Lake. And when I got to go twice, and the second time, a skunk decided to visit us at 2 o'clock in the morning. And so my grandparents are in these little beds, and my parents are on the floor, and I'm up in a loft. And so I'm trying to get the skunk out with a flashlight. We did manage, but it was pretty funny. So lots of those, and we would go camping all the time. It was kind of constant every weekend when I was young.
I have a bear story to share. I work in hospice, and I brought my son to visit, and he's 3.5, and he likes to tell tall tales. And they just bonded. So it was just such a tender moment. And I told my son Joseph, Marian's seen a bear. And they just went back and forth with tall tales about bears. And he got so excited and told her how a raccoon ate a bear. Really, really tender. Really, really sweet to see her bond with a child.
Well, one morning in Eagle Lake, Grandpa woke up and there was a bear staring at him in the window. And I think they were both so surprised to see each other. Not sure who ran first, but so yeah, they definitely saw lots of animals. So. Yeah.
Well, you talk about connecting with kids. Even in the last days of Marian's life, she was still there. The last real conversation I had with her was probably a week before she passed away. And she was slumping in her chair a little bit, but she was still there. And I said to her, Marian, we missed you. It's good to see you. And she says, well, I don't know why. I said, because we love you, Marian. That's a good reason, isn't it? She says, I suppose that's a good reason. So, I mean, she could still, like, joke a little bit, so she was connecting. So she had a good life, and I think she went out about the best way any of us could hope, which is she faded away. You know, so she accomplished a lot in her life, and just succumbed to her age, really. So any other stories?
I met Marian about 3.5 years ago as a caregiver. I actually was in her home before she went to the nursing home. And I first got there. It took me a while to realize why I was there, because she was so intelligent and she was just, such a quick wit and everything. And, I thought she was still writing books on her computer. I thought she was still doing all this stuff, and all of a sudden it started to talk. I did that. So I met her already in, a stage of Alzheimer's, and we used to go see her husband. We used to take her to see, she couldn't drive anymore. I used to take her to see Jim, who was in the nursing home. Jim I saw in the very last stages of Alzheimer's for about a half a year before he passed, and I just loved him. He was just delightful and so gracious and such a gentleman, even at such a late stage. And Jim had a caregiver, and he would sometimes bring Jim to the house, and we would have such good lunches and picnics outside, or we'd go on a picnic to Lake Mendota, and it was just, those two were just so close. It was just amazing. And then, of course, I see Jim's picture every day, and I feel like from her, I feel like I know Jim. I just love him, and I hardly, I never knew him except the last 6 months of his life. And so, but it's hard not to think of those two together. And up until about a year ago, I just continued to hear about Marian's life, and sometimes a lot of it was when she was a young girl, and there were times on Lake Michigan at her family's summer home. And I could, sometimes we would spend hours there every week just talking about that, because that's what she most remembered and stuff. But then about a year ago, she couldn't recall without a lot of grounds and stuff. But I knew by then I had gathered so much stories about her life that I could tell them and remember this and stuff. And she was just delighted to. And then she would remember it all. She just couldn't bring it up to talk about it. And I just had so much fun with Marian. One of my favorite things was we would go for drives, and especially to see the wildflowers. And sometimes I would tease her and say, Marian, you know what that is? And I said, I wish we had one of Marian Edsall's roadside flowers. But she had such an appreciation for that stuff and for nature. And you could just see it in her eyes and her.
Let's hear it for Marian.